Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rooted Creative Podcast. Today, we are talking about the very first experience that I have had backpacking in the wilderness with a couple for elopements. It was an experience that I will never forget on so many levels. One of them being that it was incredibly difficult and hard. I did not know how difficult it would be doing. I think just mostly because it was uphill, but it was a little difficult. I was not sure how it was going to end up, but oh my word, I was very pleasantly surprised to see this was like definitely something pushing my body a little more than normal. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what happened, what the heck happened, and what I learned from this experience. And if you're an elopement photographer listening to this, I actually think you're going to gain a lot from this episode because I think the crazy thing that we've kind of set as an expectation as an elopement photographer is you have to be doing these types of elopements where you're backpacking or going somewhere crazy or just being out there in the wilderness camping overnight, that type of thing. I think there might be a little bit of like that misunderstanding of thinking like that's who you have to be as an elopement photographer, but um I'm first going to tell you that that's actually not the case. I really think you can be an elopement photographer that doesn't hike a mile in their day. Now, the reason we do the hiking is to get away from the crowds and to do that sort of thing. But I don't think that it's like necessary with every elopement photographer. You could actually be a really fantastic elopement photographer who just drives up to a spot and it's really beautiful and it just happens to be in the wilderness with a couple that's, it's just them or really intimate family, and that's your specialty, that's your job. I don't think it has to be this, which is like a backpacking type elopement. I don't think that that's necessary. But I also think when people think of elopements and elopement photographers, they used to think maybe that like they're just going down to the Elvis Chapel in Vegas and like that's how they're going to get married. But that's obviously not the case nowadays. Eloping has taken on a full new meaning. And with this couple in particular, with Emma and Sam, I mean, they wanted to go big. That meant like hiking in the wilderness, camping in the wilderness, totally roughing it, and in the most beautiful places in Yosemite National Park. So, normally, we're going to talk about that now, but normally, these views are pretty accessible by road. So even if you're listening to this and you are an elopement photographer, you don't have to do this hike to get to these places normally. But this year, the road was closed, and Emma and Sam still wanted to go up to the iconic Taft and Glacier Point, which are like the best spots in Yosemite National Park, but are normally super crowded because they're pretty accessible, for good reason. So this past week, this was the first time that I had ever done anything like this. Backpacking in the wilderness for an elopement for photography overnight and doing more than like, I think the most miles I've done on an elopement is probably like 10 in one day and not camping. So this was a 24-mile excursion. So this road was closed. So we had to hike it up. And never ever have I taken a road for granted more than this one. Like, oh my gosh. The fact that you could just access it by road is a game changer. And the fact that we had to hike 24 miles is incredible. So obviously that didn't stop Emma and Sam from getting what they wanted on their elopement day. And I am obviously the one who's down for anything. And so here I am creating this huge plan that's going to be fantastic. I map it out on all trails. I get all of the trail information and I come up with the number 16 miles. That's what it's going to take to get from point A to point B at the end of the day with these stops along the way. Now, did that happen? Was it actually 16 miles? No, it wasn't. And I don't know whose fault that was, whether it's All Trails or Yosemite. I'm not sure. But all of my tracking apps and everything said that this was 24 miles that we did with 40-pound packs on us. So, in order to even get to Glacier Point, if you wanted to nowadays, you don't have to do this 24-mile trek. You can just do like the 5-mile trek. But Emma and Sam wanted to go big. They wanted to go to Taft Point and then they wanted to go to Glacier Point, which are near each other, but they're within like 5 to 6 miles. And so it's in order to get to Taft Point, we had to do an 11-mile hike day to get there first. So, and it was uphill. Did I mention this was uphill? 4,000 feet of elevation gain with a 40-pound pack on your back. It's pretty brutal. So here's how it went. I'm going to give you a play by play of what happened and what I learned at the end of this. Because I know you guys are all dying to know how this actually went and you're waiting to hear from me on this. You've probably seen on some of my social media how this went in a nutshell, but I'm going to dive in really deep here and give you guys some information on, how I packed my bag, what happened on the trip, what did I learn, all of the important stuff that you would need to know if you're ever thinking of doing this yourself as an elopement photographer. So, number one, how I packed my bag. This was something that I learned. And also, I'm just going to share what I had in my bag. So, this is good information. I was lucky enough to have my husband go with me. And I also had my assistant Lindsay, who is a student of mine. She had just finished up her mentorship. And so I invited her along, told her to get in shape and told her to come with us. She's from Nashville. So she's like not used to elevation. And uh, I'll just kind of skip ahead real quick here. But once we started the hike, she was really out of breath and she was just like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize like the elevation here. And so that was really interesting with her. But she freaking did it. Like, Lindsay, if you're listening to this, I still can't believe you were such a champ and got through this and like killed it. And she was able to take photos and everything. Like, she is superhuman. Anyways, I was lucky enough to also have my husband go with me on this first trip because he's an EMT. I wanted someone there who could, handle an emergency situation if needed. He's also an Eagle Scout, so he's like pretty well versed in wilderness survival. So I'm like, you know what? Like, just come with us. Like, I don't feel comfortable doing this on my own quite yet. So just come with us on our first one. So, what I had packed in my bag was a 2-person tent, a sleeping mat, my sleeping bag. I had 3 freeze dried meals, a jet boil, first aid kits. I had 2 water bladders and also a water filter to fill up from a water source. Um, Now, you also have to consider packing your essentials. So, I had my clothes. I only had like one long sleeve, one short sleeve, leggings, and socks. That's all I had. And I'm like, we're going to smell at the end of this, but that's all you need. And a couple of pairs of underwear. And so I had my clothes, I had my toothbrush, toothpaste, contacts because I wear contacts. And then I had to also bring my camera equipment, which is like another 10, 20 pounds on top of that, which is fantastic. So I tried to pack really light with my camera gear and only pack the necessities. So I ended up bringing 2 lenses and then 2 bodies with my harnesses. And then having 2 camera bodies was really important to me. And if you know this, as a wedding photographer, if one body just decides to not work one day, like, what do? You're in the middle of the wilderness, you have no other cameras, you can't go back to your car. So I was like, 2 bodies is a necessity, just for the backup purposes and also for packing purposes, because I could kind of like pack them together with the 2 lenses that I brought as well. Not including the batteries, the cards, and all of that with the harness. It's just all of it is extra weight. When you're doing like a backpacking trip like this, every little thing, every little ounce counts because you're hauling it on your back. So every weight little thing matters. So that's what I essentially had in my bag. I had a couple pair of socks and the essentials for clothing, but other than that, we pretty much had everything in the pack. And my Osprey backpack that I have is only like a weekender bag, so it's not super large. My husband's is like a 2-week bag, so his was very big. He ended up bringing a couple of like safety necessities, like he had a hatchet, he had a couple of other things that, I wouldn't necessarily think to bring. But he brought them just in case we got into an emergency situation, him being an EMT firefighter slash Boy Scout. Like, I let him do his thing. So I'm like, you know what? You bring what you want. I'm here for it. But his bag was very heavy. and this is going to be important to know later. Okay. So the first leg of the trek, right? So just to put this into perspective, my husband, Lindsay, and I all drove up very early. So I had to pick James up from work. We left the house at probably 5. I picked James up at 6 a.m. and then we drove another 6 hours to get to Yosemite. So when we arrived there at 12:30, we literally parked and then we hiked. Like we parked, got our bags all ready to go, and then we just started the trail. So there was like no rest period in between that. I think we stopped for lunch. We got Chick-fil-A, like we got a nice hearty lunch. But then after that, like we just arrived and then we met the couple and then the videographers and then we're like, let's go. So that obviously was not the best foot to get started on just because we were a little tired, obviously. But that's how we started. So we, started just on the straight uphill. Like there was no flat area. It was all uphill. And it was pretty brutal. Like if you're not in shape and you're doing this, especially in elevation, it's tough. Like we were sweating and huffing and puffing, and it was pretty tough at first. And Lindsay, had I think like there's a lot of mental game that comes into it when you're starting on a really tough trail and you know that this is going to be like a really long trek. I think mentally, like you can get into your head a little bit like, can I do this? Like, I can't even do 1 mile of this. How am I going to do 16 more of this? Right. A lot of it's mental. And so we had to kind of talk Lindsay up a little bit because obviously she wasn't really adjusted to elevation. And we had to tell her, hey, Lindsay, like you can do this. Like your health and safety is first, but if you don't think you can do this, like go back now, take the car, go get a hotel room. But if you can, it's going to be completely worth it. So, figure out what you want to do, right? She ended up continuing on with my husband. They were a ways behind us. I was with the videographers and the couple. And as we're going up, not really in the groove yet still, but like getting in that groove. Once I think you hit like 4 miles, you kind of hit like a groove, right? Like you're just like, all right, let's go. Your body's just going at that point. Like, even though it hurts, you're just going. And so once we made it past some of the really tough parts and we got to kind of the tops of the cliffs, we ended up having some of the best views that I didn't even know existed in Yosemite, which was fantastic. I mean, they were just incredible. Honestly, like we would have been fine not even going to Taft Point. We would have been fine just staying at those places because they were beautiful. Like a clear view of El Capitan that I've never seen before from a different perspective, and the whole valley. Like it was awesome to just like experience a different part of Yosemite that I've never seen, even though like I've been to Yosemite so many times. So that made it obviously worth it. But once we kind of made it past those really beautiful viewpoints, we had to keep pushing on. And at some point my Apple Watch died, so I didn't really know how many miles I had gone at that point until after we were done. And so we're filling up with water as we're going on water. Like we had water sources, like rivers and streams to kind of fill up our water bladders because we're just like draining our water very quickly, obviously, to stay hydrated, to not get altitude sickness, and then also because it was hot, it was a little warm. So I would just like to point out real quick, I am 5.5 months postpartum doing this. So I'm actually really proud of myself that I was able to do this after giving birth only almost 6 months ago, right? I was able to keep up with the group, and I honestly think the only reason I was able to do that is because I had been training and working my body with cardio leading up to this because I knew that this was going to be tough. And if I hadn't have done that, I'm not sure I would have been able to do this elopement. So that's just like a side note. But the uphill that we had to take really slow and at each of our own paces because it was constant uphill. If you've ever summited a mountain before, I'm sure you know this, but there is no break. Like there's no flat ground, there's no downhill. It's just like uphill, maybe like half a mile of flat ground and then uphill again. So we obviously had to take some breaks, fill up on water, but we kept trekking. Now here's the crazy part. We were chasing the light. So we got started with this hike at 2 p.m. We had to be at Taft Point, obviously, before 8 o'clock when it was too dark. Otherwise, they weren't going to be able to get photos at Taft, right? So we started the hike at 2 and had to be there before 8. So that's like I think that was like 7.5 hours that we had to do 11 miles, right? Crazy. So, that was like kind of the stressful part is we were trying to keep a timeline, and keep the time schedule to get there in time, which as the photographer and as the elopement guide, obviously I know that's important. So I'm like, even though I'm completely exhausted trying to like keep up, I'm like, okay, let's go, let's go. Um, Anyways, so we ended up making it there probably around like 8 o'clock. I ended up getting there with the videographers. Our couple just decided to like run the last 2 miles. I don't know how because those last 2 miles were uphill and we were slightly dying a little. So I don't know. But we ended up getting to Taft Point and took their photos right away as soon as we arrived there. Not even a chance to take a break because the sun was just setting over the mountains. And so we had that blue hour to take photos. And as soon as we were done with the photos, then we were able to set up our tents at Taft. Yeah, we slept at Taft Point, but you've never done that before. So that was pretty cool. And we made dinner and, set our little bear can up out away from our camp because when you're backpacking in the woods, you need to have some type of bear storage to not attract bears to your tent because that could be dangerous. So we had a bear canister, set that like 200 feet away from our camp, and then slept as best we could. But I'm going to be real with you. I did not sleep that night, not because I was scared or tired, because I definitely was, but just because I think, anxious about getting up early because we had to get up at 2:45 a.m. So we went to bed at like 10 and we had to get up at 2:45 to hike to Glacier Point for sunrise, which is like the best view ever of like Half Dome is watching it at sunrise. So, we slept as much as we could. Now, this is the second leg of the trek. So, the first leg that we just did that first day, 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., was 11 miles. This next trek, the second leg of the trek, where we got up at 2:45 a.m., was going to be another 11 miles. But that's not what I had estimated. But that's what it ended up being. I think it was like 4.5 miles to Glacier from Taft, and then it was another 5 miles down to the bottom. So I guess maybe that was like 9 miles. Um, so basically, we ended up getting up at 2:45 a.m., packing up camp, and then it was that trek, which wasn't too hard. There wasn't a lot of uphill. We made it probably about like a mile away from Glacier, right? And then the groom who was at the front of the pack just stops. He just stops dead in his tracks on the trail, and we're like, "What's going on?" And we all had our headlamps. It's dark at this point. The sun isn't up yet. So you can't really see anything around you. You just have your headlamps, right? He stops and he's like, there's a mountain lion like right in front of us. And I was a little bit behind, so I saw them all stop and then they're yelling at me to get up there and I'm like, "Okay, okay." So I'm like jogging quickly to get to them and they're like, "Do you have?" They're like, "There's a mountain lion, like they're making a lot of noise, like trying to act big and just like trying to like scare the mountain lion away." And I'm like, "I have an air horn, like let me pull it out." We're setting the air horn off, trying to get this mountain lion to go away. And it goes like up on this incline right next to us. So now we're below it, which is not really a great position to be in when you run into a mountain lion. It's not great because they could just, you know, the higher ground, Obi-Wan Kenobi, "It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground." Yeah, okay. So that was a little scary to have that situation going on. And we're, blowing the air horn. And now my husband and Lindsay were a little bit behind us as well. So we're radioing down to them. We had like walkie-talkies to get up here because there was a mountain lion. Like we all need to stick together and act big, be making noises. We were blowing our whistles on our packs. And yeah, it was a little scary. So basically, I didn't end up seeing it, but um when Sam first saw it, he saw the eyes glowing and he's like, "Well, what is that? Is that a deer?" And then he saw like the shadow when he like looked with his headlamp, he could see the lion just like retreat back up the hill. So that was scary. And so for about a mile, as the sun was coming up, you can kind of see a little more. as the sky was getting lighter, and he was just sitting at the top of this hill, just watching us for like probably a solid mile. He was following us, and it was a little scary. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I was like, I don't really know what to do in this situation except act large, but if he attacks, like I don't know what I'm gonna do, you know? Like, I'm just gonna run, like, but I probably can't outrun a mountain lion, so I'm not really sure. I'd probably just give up and die. So so that was really terrifying. I've never encountered a wild animal such as a mountain lion before like that. So I'm really glad we were in a bigger group of 7 people and not just like me and the couple in that situation. Just because I think the bigger the group, obviously the more intimidating, and we were all making a lot of noise. So he eventually backed off. And by the time we got to Glacier Point, it was like the perfect time. Like, the sun hadn't risen yet. It was still light enough to get ready. The couple got ready, and we just kind of had to shake off the jitters of like the mountain lion experience. Um, but once we made it, I don't know how Emma still looked fantastic and like not sweaty or disgusting like I did, but she was literally the most beautiful human. And she was just like doing her makeup. We got them ready in their suit and their dress, and they did their first look. They said their vows. And literally, as Sam is reading his vows, the sun just like crowns over Half Dome. And it was just like the coolest little thing. I'm like crying because I'm just like emotionally vulnerable and like tired. And I'm just like, okay, we made it. We did it. Um, what an emotional roller coaster that day was. But they said their vows. I was able to officiate them, which was like so special, made it so cool that I was able to do that. I said some words beforehand, got them their vows, the ring exchange, all of that good stuff. And um it was just a really, really fun ceremony that I think was like one I'll never forget. And yeah, pretty much after that, we wandered around, took some photos. The videographers and I were kind of having fun with them. And then we all just literally just chilled. We hung out, ate our breakfast, and we just sat and we watched. We had Glacier Point like completely to ourselves, which I've never experienced. As well as Taft Point. We had that also completely to ourselves. I gotta say I prefer it. It was awesome just being there alone in the wilderness without anyone else. It just kind of feels more private and more beautiful in a way, because it's quiet, there's no one around you, and you just kind of feel one with nature. And that's too hippie to say, but it's true. Um, and we just had kind of ate breakfast, and I was sitting with James and Lindsay, and Emma and Sam were off in their own little corner eating their own breakfast together and just having moments. And I wasn't taking photos. Like, that's the cool thing I think about this is, it was an experience, and I was documenting as we were going, but I wasn't doing everything for the sake of photos. Like, I was just capturing what was happening. And that, I think, is where my heart lies. I don't really like posing people. I don't like telling people, what to do on their wedding day besides like taking the portrait part of things. But the coolest thing about this experience was I was just documenting what was happening, like us hiking, us coming across a beautiful view and like getting that moment. And I will say also, I did have a camera on the outside of my bags for those moments where I could just like pull my camera up and like, take those photos. I had it like carabinered to my little waist strap, so I could just like unclip it, take photos, and then put it back. Um and so that was like the coolest thing is like we were just all eating breakfast. They were off in their own little world, like having their own thing, not having to worry about like photos, because it's not about the photos, right? It's like them getting married. That's what matters, right? And so yeah, we all just had a really relaxing morning and ate our breakfast, and all of us just kind of hung out. They listened to voice memos and a video from their parents, which was super special. Their parents that obviously couldn't be there because that's a pretty intense hike for them to come on. And eventually, when it was time to hike down, it was probably around like 11 a.m. We decided, okay, like let's go down. And I'm just going to preface this with it's called the 4 Mile Trail. It's the trail that you take to Glacier Point normally. Like, if you just wanted to go to Glacier Point, you would take this trail. It says it's 4 miles, but it did not feel like it was 4 miles. I Like there was no way it was 4 miles. It had to have been like 5 or 5.5. So, the 4-mile trail though for us was going to be downhill, whereas if you're coming obviously from the valley, it's like straight uphill switchbacks, really tough trail. But for us it was downhill, so I was like, yeah, this is gonna be easy, piece of cake, like let's do it. Well, that was not the case. Um, having have had that many miles behind us already of hiking, our legs were tired. We had some blisters on our feet already. And so going downhill is actually pretty difficult when your legs are tired and you've got blisters on your feet, jamming into your shoes as you're going downhill. So we all kind of got split up on that trail on the way down. I actually had to I had to do a little TLC to my feet and put some moleskin on because my blisters were really bad. Socks are really important. The types of socks that you have for backpacking are very important. And I did not realize that until after this trip. Um, so as we're going downhill, it just literally this trail felt so endless. I've never experienced this type of like trail where you're just like, is this the end? Nope, nope. We're still got 2 miles. Oh, we still got, 1.5 miles and it's been an hour. It was just like crazy. But eventually when we got to the bottom, and I met up with everybody at the bottom, I just collapsed. Like I literally threw my bag off. I just fell on the floor and I'm like, I'm not moving. Don't touch me. And honestly, we were all so sore after that. I don't think I was able to really walk normally for a solid 3 days after we finished. Like, it was pretty bad. My legs were not prepared. So, like, Lindsay, James, and I were literally, like, waddling to the car, like, we couldn't even walk. I mean, at that point, you just push your body so hard that you're just like, "I can't go any further, but I have to because no one's coming to get me. I have to finish." And so you just mentally have to be like, "I have to keep going even though my body can't." And it was just tough. But we were able to, we stayed in a hotel that night. We showered up, took a nice long nap that was well needed. And then we went and got some burgers and some cider and just kind of replenished our bodies. I think we burned like 20,000 calories or something like that. It was a lot. And I hardly ate, but I wasn't hungry because I was so hungry. Have you ever been at that point where you're so hungry that you're just not hungry? You're just nauseous? That's where I was. So, but I scarfed that burger down when it was time, and we had like the best sleep of our life, and then we drove home, and still couldn't walk for a solid 2 days after that. And I'll tell you, carrying a baby up and down stairs when you're that sore is pretty difficult. So that's how it went. That's the story. That's everything in a nutshell. I've never experienced an elopement like this before, and I honestly had a lot of fun doing it, but there are some things that I would definitely change looking back. Obviously, not having to put my body through that much work and be that sore would be a fantastic thing. So, here's what I learned. I'm going to tell you, elopement photographer to elopement photographer, if you're listening to this. If you're going to be doing a trek like this, I would space it out not just 2 days. And then if you're going to do a multiple day trip, make sure you charge for that as well. I think at the end of the day, like, yes, the couple is looking for the least expensive package that you can have. But if you know that your body can't do 24 miles in 2 days, tell them that and say, "Listen, like, I think I rather not rush it and try and, like, catch the light and push our bodies really hard and be really sore. I think we should space it out 2 days, and not feel the rush of trying to do it in 2." Um, yes, like, the package will be a little higher, but I think at the end of the day, like, it's gonna be worth it, right? Doing that many miles in that many days was a little much for me, and honestly, like, for everyone else in the group who was really fit, we were struggling a lot. We were pretty sore. So that's number 1. I would space it out, charge accordingly on your packages for a backpacking elopement like that where it's gonna be multiple days. Number 2, All Trails lied to me. I'm not sure how that happened, but I had accounted for, like, a 16-mile trek, but when looking at my tracking apps, it came down to like 24 miles. So I don't know who's right there, but it did not feel like 16 miles. Like it seriously felt like more than that. Whether it was 24, maybe not, maybe 20, but it was hard. Like it was not 16 miles. So I'm not sure who lied there, if it was Yosemite or if it was all trails, but something did not add up. Um, Number 3, pack as light as possible with only necessities because, like I said, every little thing weight wise matters. So, really only bring what is necessary. Don't overpack and plan on wearing the same clothes for like 3 days in a row. Yeah. You're going to be a little smelly. So, if you're listening to this and you're like, Danny, I don't want to be smelly, I don't want to do this, well, backpacking might not be for you, and that's okay. Number 4, be extra prepared when you run into wildlife. We learned this one with the mountain lion. Um, thank God I had an air horn. That's all I got to say, because if I didn't, we would have had to be yelling, and I just don't know how reliable that would have been. So I had an air horn, bring bear spray, bring things and protection for you and your couple, especially if you are the elopement guide. You need to be prepared for that, for any situation that happens where you're going to be involved with a bear, a mountain lion, a moose, a bison, whatever it is, right? You want to be prepared. So make sure you have the means to do that. Number 5, be in shape. I think this goes without saying, but if you're going to be doing a hiking trail in elevation uphill for however many miles, you want to be in shape. You don't want to be doing that after not having worked out for 4 months. So how I prepared is I did a Peloton. I did like, I think the 45-minute Peloton workouts, I did them every other day for about 3 months as soon as I could after giving birth. Like I was like, let's go. Because I wanted to be as fit as possible for this elopement. I knew it was going to require a lot from my body. And if I hadn't had worked out, I definitely wouldn't have been able to do this. So let that be motivation for you to get some workout on and to get in shape. And then number 6, it was loads of fun. It was such a good experience. It was definitely tough. It was definitely, like, looking back now, I can laugh about it, but during it was definitely hard. And Emma and Sam were obviously incredible. They're an incredible couple. I love them to death. And it was such an awesome experience to be a part of. But this type of elopement photography, it's not for everyone. And I just want to validate that if you're listening to this. You don't have to be a backpacker elopement to do elopement photography. This was just something that I said yes to, that I knew I was going to be able to do. But don't say yes to something if you don't feel comfortable doing it. I know plenty of elopement photographers that don't do this and are just fine. And they have beautiful experiences and beautiful stories to tell still without having to hike 24 miles or go to the top of 14,000 feet mountain peaks, right? Like you don't have to do that to be an elopement photographer. So it's not for everyone, and that's okay. But do what makes sense for you and your business, right? That's what matters, I think, ultimately at the end of the day. Okay, guys. Well, what do you think? Did I do okay? Like, what are your thoughts on like backpacking like this? Hit me up. We'll talk about it in the Facebook group. I will start a thread, and I don't know if you've listened to this and you have something to say, like come chat with me. But I hope that this opened your eyes a little bit to what a backpacking elopement can look like, and how to prepare for a backpacking elopement, because it took a lot of preparation, whether that's like preparing your body physically and mentally, and then also like having the gear to do it as well. Yeah, I spent like $600 at REI before this trip, and I had already had most of my equipment. The $600 came from like silly necessity things that we needed. And I was like, how is this that expensive? I don't understand. So anywho, I hope that this was entertaining for you nonetheless. If you're listening to this and you're like, I'm never going to do this, I hope that this entertained you, because I'll tell you, it was definitely tough for me. And by the end of it, James wanted to kill me. Um, bless his soul. I love him so much. But oh man, he's like, on my 2 days off, this is what you put me through. And I'm like, yep. So um, he's the best husband. I love him. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. Hey, be sure to come and join the website winning workshop. We just announced it today. I know you heard about it earlier in this episode, but this is going to be so much fun. It's literally only $47. You're going to get 3 guides talking all about brand messaging, a checklist for your web pages, and then also like the user friendly manual for a website to get you those conversions and to get people to stay on your site. And I'm going to be critiquing your websites. Yeah, it's going to be like a 4-hour deal. So if you want to join, it's only $47. It's going to be on July 26th at 1 p.m. Pacific. I want to see you there. And if you sign up on June 27th, you only have to pay $37. You get $10 off. So I want to see you. Let me know your thoughts. And until next time, I will see you next Wednesday. Thanks for tuning in, and God bless.